I'm Irene Walsh. I'm 30 years old, and until that night, I believed control was something you earned. I worked for it. I saved for it. I built it line by line, number by number, the same way I built my career as a senior data analyst at a tech firm in Portland, Oregon. I live alone in a condo I paid for myself. No inheritance, no shortcuts, just years of overtime, skipped vacations, and a belief that if I was careful enough, disciplined enough, nothing could knock my life off its rails. That belief started cracking the year I was hit by a delivery truck that ran a red light. The accident shattered my left leg and nearly wiped out my finances. 6 weeks without work taught me a brutal lesson. Independence is fragile when your bank account is too. That was when I created my emergency fund. $86,000. Not a luxury, a boundary, a line between safety and disaster. I promised myself I would never be helpless like that again. That money wasn't for spending, it was for survival. Last night, after a 14-hour workday fixing a system deployment that refused to cooperate, all I wanted was silence. It was almost midnight when I parked, walked into my condo, and kicked off my shoes. The air felt wrong, heavy somehow, but I blamed exhaustion. I dropped my bag, poured a glass of water, and did what I always do before bed. I checked my accounts. Checking first, normal, then savings, my emergency fund. The number loaded. I stared at it, waiting for my brain to correct itself. $912. I refreshed the app, closed it, opened it again. Same number. My chest tightened so fast, I thought I might pass out. I scrolled down, hands shaking, heart pounding loud enough to drown out everything else. 3 withdrawals, massive ones, all dated today. $86,000. Gone. I couldn't breathe. That money wasn't just savings. It was my safety, my proof that I was finally okay, and someone had reached in and ripped it out like it didn't matter. My phone vibrated in my hand. Mom! I opened the message, my vision blurring. I used that money. Call it my reward for over 30 years of raising you. That was it. No apology, no explanation, no emergency. Just a statement, like she was collecting a bonus she'd earned. Something inside me went cold. I called her immediately. She didn't answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. I called my father next, my voice cracking despite my effort to stay calm. Dad, I said, Mom took my emergency fund, all of it. There was a pause, a long sigh. The sound of sheets rustling, like I was an inconvenience interrupting his sleep. Irene, he said, don't make this into a big thing. You know how your mother is. That was my life savings, I said. I built that after the accident. It's family money, he replied gently, the same way he always did when he wanted things smoothed over. It's not gone. It's just shared. Don't upset her. Shared. The word tasted bitter. He hung up before I could say anything else. I stood there in my kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to silence. Then I noticed the shoes by the door. Expensive running shoes. New, my sister Celia's. She was 35, unemployed, and living in my second bedroom, temporarily, for almost a year. I walked into the living room. She was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, completely relaxed. They took my money, I said. She didn't look up. A second later, my phone buzzed. A message in the family group chat. Not words. A laughing sticker. A cartoon cat wiping tears from its eyes. My stomach dropped. She knew. She had known before I did. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw it clearly for the first time. The casual confidence, the lack of surprise, the comfort of someone who never expected consequences. That was the moment it hit me. I wasn't the daughter, I wasn't the sister. I was the backup plan. The emergency fund. The quiet solution whenever something went wrong. The account they could tap without asking because, in their minds, it was never really mine. I stood there, my entire understanding of family collapsing in slow, brutal clarity. They hadn't stolen from me in a moment of desperation. They had taken what they believed already belonged to them. And I realized, standing alone in my own home, that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal that had been waiting for the right moment. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't scream, accuse, or demand explanations. The moment the shock settled into something colder, I did what I had trained myself to do for years. I switched off emotion and started working the problem. At my desk the next morning, while the city outside my office windows moved through its normal rhythm, I pulled every financial record I had access to. Years of statements, every linked account, every transfer. I treated my own life like a dataset that had suddenly produced impossible results. Patterns emerged quickly. There was an account I had almost forgotten about, a small joint account under my name and my mother's, originally set up for convenience. It existed for one purpose only: to pay utilities for my parents' house in Beaverton. Electricity, water, internet, predictable amounts, predictable dates. What I saw instead made my throat tighten. Over the past 9 months, nearly $28,000 had been pulled from that account. The withdrawals weren't random. They were precise. Always just under thresholds that would trigger automatic alerts. Always late at night, usually between 11:45 and 12:30, almost always on weekends. Whoever did this knew exactly how the system worked. The destination account appeared the same way every time. Silver Fern Studio, LLC. I ran the name through public business records. The result came back immediately. Registered owner, Celia Walsh, my sister, listed business activity, creative consulting, no tax filings, no recorded revenue, no operational footprint, a shell. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen until the numbers stopped blurring. This wasn't impulsive. It wasn't desperation. It was planning. Months of it. I kept digging. Access logs from my emergency fund told a story I hadn't wanted to imagine. Logins from a device I didn't recognize, always between 3 and 5 in the morning. The IP address resolved to one location, my parents' house. That shouldn't have been possible. My emergency account required multi-factor authentication. Codes sent to my phone, voice confirmation for large transfers. Then I remembered the kitchen. The smart speaker sat on the counter, always listening, always convenient. I had used it casually for reminders, timers, even to read messages aloud when my hands were full. Buried in the settings, history was the proof I needed. Voice playback logs, audio triggers. My mother's voice, faint but unmistakable, asking the device to repeat notifications. Reading security codes aloud into the room. I closed my eyes, nausea rolling through me. They hadn't hacked anything. They hadn't needed to. They had waited, listened, and taken advantage of my trust. What I found next was worse. A scanned authorization form appeared in the document history linked to my bank profile. It carried my name, my address, and a signature that looked like mine until I studied it closely. The curves were wrong, the pressure inconsistent. A composite stitched together from older documents. I checked postal records next, mail forwarding requests, delivery changes. At some point, bank correspondence had stopped coming directly to my condo. It had been rerouted. Someone had been intercepting my financial mail. By the time I finished reviewing the evidence, my hands were steady again, but my chest felt hollow. Every step had required coordination, access to my personal history, knowledge of my routines, a shared understanding among the people involved. This was not one person acting alone. It was all three of them. The realization didn't come with tears. It came with clarity. My family hadn't panicked and crossed a line. They had tested boundaries slowly, watching to see if I noticed, adjusting when I didn't. The emergency fund was simply the final escalation. Later that evening, I sat alone at my dining table with my laptop open, the glow of spreadsheets reflecting off the darkened windows. Outside, Portland was quiet. Inside, the silence felt intentional. I saved copies of everything, backups in multiple locations, time-stamped records, screenshots with metadata intact. I didn't know yet what I would do with it all, only that losing it was not an option. From somewhere down the hall, I heard Celia moving around, humming softly as if nothing had changed. The sound made my jaw tighten, but I didn't confront her. Not yet. I shut my laptop and let the room fall back into darkness, knowing one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever this was, it wasn't finished. I didn't try to handle it alone. By the time I finished organizing the evidence, I knew this had crossed far beyond a family dispute. I needed someone who understood the law, someone who wouldn't soften the truth for the sake of peace. I called Hannah Moore. We had gone to law-adjacent courses together years ago in Seattle, back when I was the data person helping law students survive statistics. She picked up on the second ring, and before I finished explaining, Her tone changed from friendly to precise. "Stop talking," she said calmly. "Send me everything, and don't warn them." Within 48 hours, my financial life was locked down with a level of security I hadn't known was possible. Credit bureaus were frozen. New banks replaced the old ones. Physical security keys arrived overnight, small metal devices that felt heavier than they looked. Every account was severed from every shared access point. The silence that followed was immediate and unnatural. Hannah drafted the letter. Not emotional, not threatening. Clinical. It listed the exact amount taken, the dates, the methods, and the supporting documentation. It referenced forged authorization forms and intercepted correspondence without exaggeration or drama. It ended with a deadline and a warning about potential civil and criminal consequences. I signed it digitally without hesitation. The response was explosive. Within days, my name started circulating online in places I rarely visited. Family friends posting vague comments about ungrateful children. Distant relatives sharing long paragraphs about loyalty and sacrifice. My mother reposted them all, adding nothing herself, letting the narrative form without her fingerprints. I was portrayed as cold, selfish, obsessed with money. The irony would have been amusing if it hadn't been so calculated. Celia didn't stop there. A week later, I was called into a meeting with our internal compliance team at work. The room was neutral and quiet, designed to feel fair while holding power. An anonymous complaint had been submitted, accusing me of manipulating internal data models for personal advantage. I listened without interrupting, my pulse steady, my expression neutral. When they finished, I asked for time to retrieve documentation. They didn't know that I had already anticipated this. I provided access logs, version histories, peer review records, and audit trails that showed exactly who had touched what and when. Every number aligned. Every change was documented. The accusation collapsed under its own weight. 2 days later, my manager called me into his office. He didn't apologize for the investigation. He didn't need to. Instead, he told me the company was restructuring the analytics division and wanted me to lead the new team. "You didn't flinch," he said. "That matters." At home, the atmosphere changed. Celia stopped pretending. The casual arrogance vanished, replaced by sharp glances and slammed doors. She paced the apartment, talking loudly on the phone, making sure I could hear fragments about lawyers and unfair treatment. I didn't engage. I didn't respond. Hannah advised me to document everything: dates, times, behavior, patterns. Another letter arrived from my parents' address, this one handwritten. It talked about family, about betrayal, about how money had poisoned me. It didn't mention the forged signatures or the rerouted mail. It didn't need to. The absence said enough. I placed it in a folder with the rest. Each step forward made the distance between us wider, but it also made my footing more stable. The fear that had paralyzed me after discovering the withdrawals was gone. In its place was something quieter and more dangerous: resolve. I wasn't chasing revenge. I wasn't trying to win. I was enforcing a boundary that should never have needed enforcement in the first place. And as the legal machinery began to move, slowly and deliberately, I understood that the story my family had told themselves was no longer in their control. They had underestimated what happens when the person they dismissed decides to stop protecting them. I chose the setting carefully, not a restaurant, not my parents' house, my own apartment, stripped of anything that could soften the moment. The dining table was cleared, except for my laptop, a legal pad, and a small recording device placed in plain sight. I invited a neutral witness, a former colleague who worked in compliance and understood documentation without emotional involvement. Everyone who entered the room knew this was not a family conversation. Celia arrived first. She looked restless, pacing before she even sat down. My mother followed, calm in a way that felt rehearsed. My father trailed behind her, eyes down, already signaling where he planned to stand. I explained the ground rules once, evenly, without raising my voice. The meeting would be recorded, no interruptions, no rewriting the past, only facts. I began with the data. Bank statements filled the screen, organized by date, amount, and destination. I walked them through the withdrawals from the joint account, the late-night timing, the transfers to Silver Fern Studio. I showed public business records, tax gaps, and the absence of legitimate activity. I moved to access logs next, highlighting IP addresses that matched my parents' home network. Celia shifted in her chair. My mother crossed her arms. When I played the audio logs from the smart speaker, the room changed. Hearing my own security codes spoken aloud, repeated back by a machine, stripped the situation of denial. My father's face went pale. Celia stopped moving altogether. I didn't pause. I displayed the forged authorization form, then overlaid it with my genuine signature for comparison. The inconsistencies were obvious even to someone without training. I showed postal records documenting rerouted mail. I showed timestamps, metadata, and verification hashes. "This isn't interpretation," I said calmly. "It's documentation." Celia broke first. She leaned forward suddenly, hands clenched together, her voice rising despite herself. She said she hadn't thought it would go this far. She said she needed the money to get her business off the ground. She said Mom told her it was fine, that I had plenty, that I wouldn't even notice at first. My mother cut in sharply, telling her to stop talking. Celia kept going. She said my mother planned everything: the account thresholds, the timing, the idea to use the smart speaker, the forged paperwork. She said it was framed as something deserved, something earned over decades of sacrifice. She said she had trusted that logic because it had always worked before. The words landed heavily in the room. My mother didn't deny it. She straightened in her chair and looked directly at me, her expression firm, almost offended. She said a daughter's money belonged to her parents. She said raising me had cost far more than what she took. She said the term theft was insulting when applied to family. I asked her one question, and only one. "Did you authorize the forged documents?" She answered without hesitation. She said paperwork was just paperwork, and that intent mattered more than signatures. She said no one had been hurt. The silence afterward felt deliberate. I ended the meeting without argument. There was nothing left to debate. The recording device captured everything it needed to. Hannah took over from there. She arranged a formal session with the bank's fraud investigation unit, ensuring all procedures were followed precisely. The call was scheduled, logged, and recorded with consent. I listened without speaking as my mother explained her actions again, confident in her justification. Halfway through, she corrected the investigator on a technical detail, a processing step that hadn't been disclosed publicly, a safeguard only someone directly involved would know. There was a pause on the line. The investigator asked her to repeat herself. She did. When the call ended, no one said anything for several seconds. The shift was subtle but irreversible. This was no longer a dispute that could be managed quietly. The legal threshold had been crossed. I gathered my materials and shut my laptop. The meeting room, my apartment, felt smaller than it had before, as if the walls were absorbing what had just happened. No one followed me when I stood up. No one tried to stop me. The recording device continued to blink steadily on the table, preserving a version of events that could no longer be rewritten. What came next was already in motion. The agreement arrived quietly, without drama or raised voices. It came as a formal document drafted in precise language, outlining consequences no one in my family had ever believed would apply to them. Faced with the possibility of criminal charges, they signed. Every clause mattered. Full repayment of the stolen funds, structured over 24 months with automatic enforcement. A notarized letter acknowledging responsibility, not vague regret. A permanent no-contact order that barred them from reaching me directly or indirectly. It wasn't mercy. It was containment. Celia packed her things the same day. I stood in the doorway as she carried boxes past me, her movements stiff and angry, her eyes refusing to meet mine. There were no final speeches, no apologies, no last-minute appeals. When she handed over the keys, I took them without comment. After she left, I changed the locks and reset every access code in the apartment. The silence that followed felt heavy, but it also felt clean. My mother didn't say goodbye. She left messages at first, filtered through attorneys and formal channels, her words sharpened by resentment rather than regret. She framed herself as a victim of ingratitude, as someone punished for loving too much. Eventually, the messages stopped. Anger, it turns out, is exhausting when it has nowhere left to land. My father called once. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. He didn't argue or defend anyone this time. He spoke about mistakes, about hoping things could have turned out differently. I listened without interruption and said very little in return. Silence, in that moment, was the most honest response I had. When the call ended, I realized something had shifted permanently, not just between us, but inside me. Weeks passed, then months. The repayments began on schedule. Each deposit appeared exactly when the agreement required. Impersonal and precise. I didn't celebrate them. I didn't feel vindicated. The money was never the victory. The boundary was. One evening, long after the paperwork had been filed and the noise had faded, I stood alone in my living room. Portland rain tapped softly against the windows, steady and familiar. The city outside moved on, unaware of what had been dismantled inside these walls. I looked around at the apartment I had built my life in, the furniture I chose, the quiet I paid for, the space that was finally, unmistakably mine. Losing my family hurt in ways I didn't expect, not all at once, but in small, delayed waves. Certain holidays felt emptier. Certain memories resurfaced with new weight. I allowed myself to feel that grief without questioning whether it meant I had done the wrong thing. Because I hadn't. For the first time, I slept without checking my phone in the middle of the night. I opened my bank app without bracing for disaster. I walked through my days without the low hum of anxiety that had lived beneath everything for years. I learned that love without boundaries is not love at all. It is permission, and permission, once granted to the wrong people, is rarely returned willingly. What I gained wasn't revenge or closure in the way stories usually promise. It was something quieter and far more durable: the right to decide who has access to my life, the freedom to say no without justification, the understanding that protecting yourself does not make you cruel, it makes you whole. Thank you for listening to my story. If you stayed with me from beginning to end, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please leave a comment and let me know. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories like this.